Tattoos, of all things, are they FDA approved? Is there a FDA tattoo removal process? What about the inks that are used in that? What about the tattoo guns? If you've ever had a tattoo or thought about getting a tattoo or thought about getting rid of a tattoo that you had gotten, there's an idea for a business. We put them on and we take them off. Sort of like viruses and antiviruses. I always thought that would be a great business pair together. Well, it turns out, as you've heard us many times on the show say, these things depend. If they're a device, it depends greatly on whether it meets the definition of a device. And up here on the iPad, we have the definition of a medical device. So we're going to start our conversation here. So does FDA approve tattoo guns? Do they approve tattoos? Do they approve, or we should be saying clear for these things, removal devices? And if we go all the way back to the idea of what is a medical device, the first thing that a medical device might be is something recognized basically in the recipe book, the National Formulary, or the United States Pharmacopoeia, or any supplement to them. I think in the 13 years that Into Being has been in business, we've encountered a device that we were working on that met this definition maybe once. The one that we encounter much more often is it's intended for use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, or in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease in man or other animals. And pretty quickly when you read that, you think to yourself, that doesn't have a lot to do with tattoos, does it? Interesting. There's a third thing that could qualify something as a medical device if it's intended to affect the structure or any function of the body of man or other animals, which doesn't achieve its primary intended purposes through chemical action or metabolism. So right off the bat, you can be suspicious as to whether, are these devices? Are tattoo guns devices? Are the inks devices? And all we have to do is go look at FDA to find out that they are in fact considered cosmetics. And if you are familiar with the idea that the FDA is partly regulated under the FD&C, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, you realize that FDA is responsible for regulating cosmetics as well. So why talk about cosmetics on a show where we're mostly focused on MedTech development, right? Devices, drugs, combination products, biologics. Well, because the overlap of these worlds can teach us all sorts of things about the nuances that are going to drive our companies, our development processes. And frankly, if you're just asking how safe is this process, you might find this interesting. FDA says, and this is from a handout that they've put out in preceding years, FDA has not approved any inks for injection into your skin. FDA has not approved henna or hair dye for use on your skin. FDA does not regulate practices in tattoo parlors. Usually this is the job of state or local health departments. Well, that's interesting. You would have thought maybe they were regulating those things. We'll talk about cosmetics in more depth in just a moment. But it is true that the FDA monitors problems from tattoos and permanent makeup, and FDA does have a place to alert the public. But this isn't as in-depth as you might originally think. In fact, because these are cosmetics, FDA defines cosmetics as articles intended to be rubbed, poured, sprinkled, or sprayed on, introduced into, or otherwise applied to the human body for cleansing, beautifying, promoting attractiveness, or altering the appearance. Skin moisturizers, perfumes, lipsticks, fingernail polishes, eye and facial makeup, cleansing shampoos, permanent waves, hair colors, and deodorants, as well as any substance intended for use as a component of a cosmetic product. Well, that could certainly include inks in tattoos. I love this. It does not include soap. We are going to touch on that later just because you want to know now. Soap is not a cosmetic. It's soap. And we'll get to that in just a second. Of course, if it's intended to affect the body, it could be a drug or a medical device. And in this case, it's pretty clearly in the world of cosmetics, which FDA regulates but doesn't approve, which I found absolutely fascinating. It is true that the FD&C, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, prohibits the marketing of adulterated or misbranded cosmetics. So, for example, and this is just a partial list, a cosmetic is adulterated, if it has poison or deleterious substances in it, if it's It consists in whole or in part of any filthy, putrid, or decomposed substance. I am glad they're watching out for this. Or if it was held under insanitary conditions. There's more below that, and then there's also a definition of misbranded if you're making false claims about it. But FDA does not approve cosmetics before they go on the market. I actually found this very surprising. Our business is devices and combination products. And it turns out that they do not approve cosmetics, with the exception of color additives. That's the one thing that they do. But as we said before, FDA has never cleared an ink for going under your skin. So, who is responsible for safety? We're talking about the inks now. Who is responsible for the safety of the cosmetic? Companies and individuals who manufacture or market cosmetics have a legal responsibility to ensure the safety of their products. The law nor FDA regulations require specific tests to demonstrate the safety. I find that really interesting, and they don't have to share safety information with the FDA. They don't have to register. No registration number is required to import cosmetics into the United States. So for as hard as we think about the drugs we're putting into our bodies, you can slather cosmetics all over yourself, and there is nothing that FDA says about it. They do worry about insanitary conditions. Here's a guidance document that is in draft form. Insanitary conditions in the preparation, packing, and holding of tattoo inks, and the risk of microbial contamination guidance for industry. So it is true that they're concerned about bad effects coming out of things like adulteration and misbranding, right? Those are the things that FDA says they have jurisdiction over. But beyond that, those inks, they're not FDA cleared, they're not FDA approved. If something bad happens, FDA will come and try to let people know, but that's about it. Oh, one more thing while we're on the topic of cosmetics. What if it's soap? I love this from FDA. Soap is a category that needs special explanation. That's because the regulatory definition of soap is different from the way in which people commonly use the word. Products that meet the definition of soap, and this is all from FDA, are exempt from the provisions of the FD&C Act because even though it includes articles for cleansing in the definition of a cosmetic, it also excludes soap from the definition of a cosmetic. So they have a definition here of soap. You don't really care what the definition of soap is, just that it's different and it's not a cosmetic. So there you go. Well, what about removing tattoos? We haven't gotten to needles yet. We're going to talk about needles at the end here. But what about getting rid of tattoos? One of the most common ways is removing them by laser. And from what I understand, this can be a painful process. And it does turn out that FDA, not so much because of tattoos, but because of the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, they have jurisdiction to regulate light-emitting products and radiation-emitting products. It turns out they regulate all sorts of medical lasers, including ones falling under this product code, GEX, Powered Laser Surgical Instrument, which is defined as a laser for use in general surgery and in dermatology, intended to cut, destroy, or remove tissue by light energy emitted. It's a Class 2 device. Looks like there's some exemptions for that where it could be a Class 1 device. And devices are cleared all the time under product codes like GEX. They're not strictly for tattoo removal. Some are for hair removal, for example, there, or a pulsed dental laser system down there, or a dermal cooling device. All of these cleared under the GEX product code. So there's definitely a basis for these things getting cleared as medical devices. And in fact, if you look at one who got cleared, this is from a company called Pico Care. They're a company that got FDA clearance through the 510K process. And they are intended for use. So when we think about devices and we think about clearances, we think about intended use of the device. They're intended for use in surgical and aesthetic applications in dermatology. And this one wavelength is indicated for tattoo removal for dark colored tattoo inks and for multicolored tattoos containing dark-colored tattoo inks in patients with all skin types, Fitzpatrick 1 through 6. And then they have another wavelength only for Fitzpatrick skin types 1 through 3 for lighter colored tattoo inks. So here's a medical device. It's there to remove tissue. And this is one thing that FDA says in one of their guidance documents is that, you're not really removing, you're removing tissue. You're destroying stuff. And so in that sense, we are affecting the structure of the body. It falls pretty clearly under the realm of a medical device. There are other ways of getting that skin off: dermabrasion, ablative lasers to burn the top layer of skin entirely off, as well as surgical removal of tattooed skin, just literally to cut it out. As FDA says, technically these methods do not remove the pigment. Instead, they wound the skin above and around the pigment to stimulate an immune response. That's pretty clearly a reaction that the body is having. And the results are highly variable. So not a fun way to get things out. And if creams are attractive, FDA has not approved tattoo removal ointments and creams or do-it-yourself tattoo removal kits. So FDA says we don't have any evidence that these things work. So that's interesting. We've talked about the ink that goes in and said, yeah, FDA will come and do some cleanup afterwards, but they haven't approved inks to go under your skin. These are regulated as cosmetics. FDA talks about adulteration and misbranding, but they don't go and approve these things. So buyer beware. State and local authorities have jurisdiction over tattoo parlors, but at some level, you can put in kind of whatever you want. The way that you get them off, that's pretty clearly a medical device, especially if it's a laser-based one on 2 counts. It's affecting the function and structure of the body by removing skin and also stimulating an immune response, as well as being a radiation-emitting product. And so that sort of falls clearly within the purvey of the FDA as a medical device. So what about the needles? What about those needles that are bouncing up and down hundreds of times a second that actually inject the ink under the skin? I found this fascinating because this is a place that I came up absolutely empty. Couldn't find any evidence that these are FDA cleared in any way. It seems like it falls under, and again, not legal or medical advice, and just from the little bit of research that I did, was not able to find any cleared FDA tattoo guns. These appear to be completely under the jurisdiction of state and local authorities, even though they are punching holes 1 to 2 millimeters deep in your skin hundreds of times a second. When you think that hypodermic needles are regulated because we're injecting beneath the top layer of your skin, it does strike you as just a little bit odd how we ended up here. But speaking of needles, and this is fascinating, have you heard about microneedling products? So this is you would think this would all be together in the same world, but it's not quite. So we're going to talk about microneedling products for just a moment here, but we're also going to show how FDA has actually carved out tattoo needles as a completely different thing and isn't really regulating those, whereas microneedling products, which are exploding, they're very interested in. So what is a microneedling product? Well, and some of you who are making devices might be interested in this, and this will help keep you out of trouble with FDA because there's really 2 basic categories that you can fall into. One is a Class 2 device. The other is a Class 1 device. And it depends, as always, on your product claims. What do you claim the device is good for? Microneedling product is a generic term that encompasses instruments with common technological features that include an array of needles, micro protrusion tips, or pins, which can be blunt or sharp and of varying lengths. They have a wide range of uses, from facilitating skin exfoliation and improvements of the appearance of the skin to treatment of scars, wrinkles, or other skin conditions. Guess what? It's these later things that get FDA's attention more deeply. So if you want to go out there and sell needles for skin exfoliation, hint, it's going to be easier than selling it for treatment of scars, wrinkles, or other skin conditions. But, and here's how we got here, right? We're talking about tattoo guns and tattoo needles. Acupuncture needles, hypodermic needles, or other needles for injection, tattoo machine needles, needle probes that emit any type of energy or deliver any type of energy to a patient, and dermabrasion devices are outside the scope of this guidance. Now, they're not saying that we don't regulate them. They're just saying this guidance on microneedles has nothing to do with any of those other needle types. So don't take this guidance and apply it to any of the things we just showed you. It's only about microneedles. And certain microneedling products are devices, whereas others are not. At the beginning, we talked about the definition of a device. What was one of those key factors? Does it affect the function or structure of the body? That's the claim that's going to get interest from FDA. The more you say this affects the function and structure of the body, the more you're going to hear about it from FDA, raising things into the Class 2 categorization. Microneedling devices for aesthetic use are classified as Class 2 devices. Microneedling devices are different than dermabrasion devices, which are not within the scope of this guidance, but dermabrasion devices are classified as Class 1. They're exempt from pre-market notification. It's a much easier path if you're going to sell a dermabrasion device, even if it contains needles. Okay, that's the key. The technology may or may not make a difference in how FDA views this. There is a guidance document, guidance for dermabrasion devices, and those tend to be Class 1. They go back to the definition of a medical device, but here's something that's going to kind of kick you into a medical device. Are you saying it treats scars? Are you saying it treats wrinkles? Are you saying it treats cellulite, stretch marks, dermatoses, acne, alopecia? Are you saying that it stimulates collagen production or angiogenesis? Are you saying that it promotes wound healing? Those are device claims that you're making when you say those things. Can the technological characteristics change how it's viewed? They can, because if the needle length and arrangement of the needles is such that it could get into living layers of skin, it's going to be kind of hard to claim that it's just a superficial dermabrasion device. So whether it can get into living layers of skin is a really key factor here. But maybe you have a device and maybe it has some shallow needles on it that are to facilitate exfoliation of the skin, to improve the appearance of the skin, to give it a smoother look and feel, to give it a luminous look. Even if they have short needles on it, that doesn't make them devices. It doesn't necessarily make them medical devices. Something to look into more. So here's a couple examples. A manual microneedling product with short blunt needles, where the firm makes claims that the product is intended to exfoliate, give the skin a luminous look, stimulate collagen production, and treat wrinkles. Good or bad? Device, not device? What do you think? Well, this is kind of a trick question because FDA started with things like exfoliate, give the skin a luminous look, which might be okay. But here they're making medical claims, stimulate collagen production, and treat wrinkles. And this lesson is something you can take to any device type. What are the claims that you're making about your device? What you say your device is good for is how it's going to be regulated. Just got off a call this week with yet another client who wanted to know what their FDA path was. But to talk about the FDA path, we have to talk about what your marketing claims are. Because FDA is not, first and foremost, fundamentally a technology regulation organization, although they do regulate technology. They are first and foremost a marketing claims regulation organization. What do you say your product is good for? What do you say that it does? That's going to determine your regulatory path in ways that if you haven't experienced it before, may be hard to believe. Here's another example. A microneedling product with short blunt needles or micro protrusion tips that do not penetrate living layers of skin and for which the firm claims it's just to facilitate skin exfoliation. These are not devices. Or one below that gives the skin a smoother look and feel, but again, does not penetrate living layers of skin. Not a device. So this, hopefully, if you're making a microneedling product, this is sort of a subtopic to the tattoo placement and removal topic. If you're making a microneedling product, You might fall into the device category. You might not fall into the device category. Or you might be a dermabrasion device as a class 1. It really depends on what you are claiming. So keep that in mind as you move forward. But what does it mean? Back to the question of tattoos as well as tattoo removal. It means that this is a mixed bag, that the inks themselves are not approved by FDA, but they are in some ways regulated by FDA against adulteration and misbranding. The parlors and the machines used appear to be almost entirely regulated by state and local authorities, which, depending on your state or locality, your mileage may vary. And the devices for removal, because they are affecting the structure and function of the skin, as well as generating an immune response, as well as being radiation-emitting devices for the most part, are regulated often as Class 2 devices by the FDA. Microneedling products don't actually overlap with this at all. FDA's guidance on it says, hey, this is a completely different category. But the key there is what are the claims you're making, and really how deep are you going? Because going deeper and making claims will ramp up what you have to do. So if you're one of many looking at these aesthetic devices, I hope I got that right. Hopefully that's useful to you on the microneedling front. Back to tattoos really quickly. Reporting problems with tattoos and tattoo removal. You know, for anyone who's watching and says, I came here because I wanted to know relatively how safe they are, or maybe I've had problems with tattoos and I want to get them off and I never want to do that again. Well, if you had an adverse negative reaction from tattoos or problems with tattoo removal, don't call us, but you can voluntarily report them to MedWatch, the FDA's safety information and adverse event reporting program. They do want to hear from you. They're sort of coming behind and doing cleanup on tattoos, but they're not going to be approving them anytime soon. If you liked that, we always say that free learning on MedTech Crossroads will help to smooth out your medical device development process. Please, if you liked what you heard today, like and subscribe the video and the channel so that we can keep getting information out. And thanks for listening today on the topic of tattoos. Are they FDA approved? How about the removal devices?